Philosophy, the organized, logical study of words and their meanings as related to what there is in the universe, what we can know about what there is in the universe and about which we can only have opinions, what is good and what is evil, and so many more words that shape our understanding of the cosmos in which we live, appears for all practical intents and purposes to have been developed in the Ionic colonies of ancient Greece. Lots of theories about why it developed there. Certainly there are other quarters in which philosophy seems to have developed, or something at least that looks like philosophy. I'm always worried about making comparative claims about cultures that have not interacted with one another. When they have interacted, we can look at the influence each has on the other. But if they haven't interacted, then I'm afraid that I think most people are going to be inclined to label the unfamiliar culture using labels that may well be appropriate in the old culture, the original culture, their culture, but the new culture, the novel culture, the one they're discovering about, would not have welcomed that term. Certainly, much of Eastern religion was labeled Eastern philosophy initially, precisely because everybody knew there was only one true religion, Christianity. Everything else had to be an imitation of it, Islam and Judaism, and this stuff doesn't look like it at all, so it can't possibly be religion. It took quite a while for Western thinkers, Western talkers to get around that. So I'm not going to say there aren't other seats of philosophy. I know there are other seats of wisdom, but I'm not sure that that's what we call philosophy in the modern sense. So, yeah, I certainly will look at other positions, and I'm welcoming anyone who wants to discuss them. However, at this point, I want to turn our eye on Ionia and see a little bit about what's going on there before the person generally considered the first master philosopher, Socrates. These thinkers are labeled the Pre-Socratics because they come before Socrates. Some of them don't. Some of them are actually his contemporary. I don't think any of them are younger contemporaries, but there are some of them that Plato claims that he interacted with. Well, more about that later. As I say, the first few are just trying to understand what is the world? What's it made of? What's going on here? And they made some important contributions in science, although it wasn't called science yet. It was just philosophy. They made some important contributions. They made some important contributions in the fields of economics and navigation and so forth. But the first really lasting contribution to philosophy, that program I just described, this logical analysis of meanings of words as they have to do with the deepest questions of life, that person is Heraclitus. Heraclitus, also known as the crying philosopher, I suppose because all of his conclusions seem very unpleasant to lots of his followers, and certainly to people who didn't follow him. Heraclitus held that everything is flux. And I don't mean soldering material. I mean that everything is in constant, unstoppable change. What is important for Heraclitus is that the arrow of time is moving forward. It is pushing everything around it every which way. And as we go forward through time, we can't be sure of where we've been, and we have no clue of where we're going, really. That is our universe, one of uncertainty, of change, of complete inconsistency. There really can't be real truth. There may not be any truth possible here. A little while from now, we're going to talk about Protagoras, and he's going to suggest there's at least a relative truth. But Heraclitus doesn't seem to have room for truth at all. Everything is in change. He says you can't even step in the same river twice because it isn't the same river. And if it was the same river, how would you know if it was the same river? Because in order to compare it, you'd have to go back to there, and you can't go back to there. You can only go that way. You can't know. You can only hope. And you can't really be sure that your hope is worth hoping. You just jump in with both feet, go down the river, see what comes next. That's Heraclitus. He does say that war is the father of all. And again, he's not talking about your military-industrial complex here and its amazing developments in technology. No, no, no. He's not talking about some of the spreading of genetic types by means of conquering a local people and misusing the locals. He's talking about change, conflict. For Heraclitus, everything is in change. Therefore, everything is conflicting. Everything is bouncing wildly down the arrow of time. And so they're going to bounce into each other. There's going to be trouble. That's Heraclitus. Set off against Heraclitus is a school centered around one particular town in Ionia, Aelia. And in Aelia, the Eleatics are founded. Their first great name is Parmenides. Parmenides wrote a wonderful, beautiful, lengthy poem dedicated to Aphrodite that I just barely understand. So I'm not going to take you into it or through it. What I'm going to do instead is mention his basic ideas and then give you the insights provided by his most famous student anyway, Zeno. Okay? So Parmenides. Parmenides, I don't think consciously set himself off against Heraclitus. There's no sign of it anywhere in the literature where he seems to be comparing his point of view to Heraclitus's, but he does set himself in opposition to the idea there is no truth. There is truth, says Parmenides. There is truth because there is permanence, and there is permanence because the universe, the cosmos, is a plenum. Now, when I say a plenum, what do I mean? A plenum is a full space. So for Parmenides, space is finite and it's full. It is perfectly, absolutely packed. There is no space. There is no nothing in Parmenides. There is only the everything. It is filling our cosmos entirely. It is permanent. Therefore, it is perfect. Therefore, anything we say about it, that we say about it, is true. Now, what we're not to do is confuse the idea that what we see with our senses is what fills the plenum. No, no, no. Our senses fool us. This one passage in Parmenides I actually did understand. The senses are like wild horses that you can never control because they run here and they run there and there's nowhere to run to. It's all illusion. What you can trust is what you can think about, what you can reason about. And that then turns us to his student Zeno. The word paradox comes from two Greek words, para, against, and doxy, doxos, opinion. So against, it's an opinion, it's a position that's against opinion. It takes opinion and turns it on its head. Another word used is antinomy, which is against law. Anti, we all recognize. Nomos, the law. Against law, against opinion. What's going on here? What Zeno is up to is trying to present an argument that will later be identified as an reductio ad absurdum. He's going to start with a basic assumption, namely that change is possible, and show that this assumption leads to a contradiction by means of illustrations in his case. We'll discuss two of them here right quickly. Number one, the paradox of the arrow. You shoot an arrow. It appears to fly across and hit the target. Zeno says, okay, if this change is happening, then at any given moment, I can take a look at that arrow, and will it appear to be moving? Well, all you have to do is take a look at the moving picture camera. We take a picture of the arrow as it moves at a speed fast enough we can actually see it. And if we stop the camera, the arrow does not appear to be moving. It appears to be just there in space. Well, if the arrow is resting at any given moment, then how can it actually be moving from the bow to the target? I ask you, both your observation and the reasoning can't be true. But why have we arrived at this ridiculous state of affairs? Well, because we assumed change was possible. If we let go of the idea that change is possible, the contradiction disappears. I know that my observation is mere illusion, and my argument is about an illusion. Then there's Achilles and the tortoise, one of the more preferred paradoxes of people who love the absurd. The absurd. Okay. Achilles, greatest of all athletes, leader of the Achaeans, mighty of men, is going to race a turtle. Now, anybody can see that that's unfair. So what we're going to do is we're going to give the turtle a head start, half of the course. So the race begins. Well, in order for Achilles to catch the tortoise, he has to travel half the distance to the tortoise. Everybody would agree you're going to have to travel half that distance between him and the tortoise. But however, although the tortoise is moving very, very slowly, the tortoise is moving. Therefore, that halfway point is constantly moving, constantly in motion. Therefore, getting to that halfway point, which is now, for all intents and purposes, undefinable, is something that's not only not going to happen for Achilles, it doesn't even mean anything to talk about. Another version of this paradox, this antinomy, is the idea that Achilles has to get half the way down the course. But in order to get half the way down the course, he's got to get half the way down the course, and half of the way down the course, and half of half the way down the course. And we can divide our trip to Antelope Freeway forever. We'll just never get there because there's always a smaller division of the track that has to be covered before I can actually get to where I need to go. And because we can always divide it one more step, there's always one more possibility we're never, ever, ever going to get there. Now, those of us with an empirical bent go, there's something funny happening here. And in fact, over the years, Zeno's positions have been pretty much shown to be in error, mistaking terms, performing some equivocations, and a little bit of unawareness of exactly how motion works. All of this coming together indicates that Zeno's examples may fail in the purest of senses in terms of what he's relying on. But at the end of the day, all Zeno's trying to say is there are basic assumptions that you're making that if you make those assumptions, they lead to ridiculous conclusions that contradict one another. Many of the claims in quantum mechanics were made to demonstrate quantum mechanics were wrong because it led to these kinds of ridiculous conclusions. The cat is alive and dead. There has to be motion, causation across distance and across time. Unfortunately, for the empiricists, these things have to be bought into because we lead to, with our experiments, proofs that they're right. So that the assumption is, well, this can't possibly be, when it is, well, let's just say it causes problems. Just as Zeno causes problems still. No longer are we convinced that the universe is unchanging and permanent in its totality, but we still hold on to the idea that there are some elements of the universe which are fixed and unchanging. And those things that are fixed and unchanging are permanent and they are perfect. So while our world around us is perhaps, as Heraclitus says, a war of all against all, rivers we can't step into more than once, Parmenides and Zeno want to suggest there is a permanence underlying it all. And we're not just talking about the arrow going that way, because after all, Heraclitus' arrow, as long as it's not going back the way it's came, you can go any damn place it wants. No. Heraclitus, everything is in flux. All is changing. There's no permanence. The Eleatics, there is a fixed reality that we can look to and depend upon for permanence and truth and an explanation, not mere opinion. We're going to see these two schools talking to each other right till today. In the meantime, you keep talking philosophy.